Hi, guys. Welcome to episode 3 of 20 Minutes with 2020 Mendocino. I'm Carlos, here with my co host Adam, founder of 2020. On this episode, we're going to be covering general grow questions from you. If you'd like to submit a question, please visit www.2020mendocino.com/podcast. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel for our previous episodes. And please give us some feedback. Let us know where we can improve. Without further ado, let me introduce my co-host, Adam.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining again, and looking forward to doing another question and answer here.
Right on. So we've gathered several general grow questions. So on this episode, I'd like to start with some basic questions. Let's see. Chris B from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Is CO2 a must-have for indoor growing?
All right, Chris. So, I've got a lot of experience in this category for growing with CO2 and without. So, I think the answer is, I would say, overall, if I had to give a short answer, it would be no. It's not a must-have. But the way I like to look at these situations is on a case-by-case basis, and a lot of it has to do with the climate control in your room. So, it's the most to me the climate is one of the biggest factors, if not the biggest factor in indoor cultivation, of course outdoor as well, but you can't control it as much. But if you have a situation where you can control the temperature fairly easily, basically a really well insulated room with decent air conditioning system that's built up to size, which is a huge problem in indoor growing, is barely anybody ever puts in a big enough air conditioner to cool the room. Then I would say absolutely. I mean, CO2, you'd be crazy not to use it if you have that type of control. However, if you don't have the money to operate or the money to purchase or the facility to handle a big CO2 or a CO2 system that's suited for the grow facility, then CO2 can be wasteful if you're basically constantly having to use intake fans, ventilation. I'm not a big fan of CO2 at that point. I mean, there is people that set up the system that basically the intake fans or the ventilation shuts off and then the CO2 kicks on. But then as soon as it gets hot, the vents kick back on. To me, that's a waste. I mean, at that point, you're pulling a lot of fresh air in, and you're spending a lot of money pumping CO2 into the air that's just getting basically sucked outside. So yeah, hopefully that answers Chris's question.
Right on. So we'll follow up with a question from Rick. Is growing in a greenhouse always superior to growing outdoors?
Rick, great question. So definitely I have a solid answer for that. The answer is no. I can give several reasons as to why. So our commercial facility in California is operated in a greenhouse. However, it's a climate control greenhouse that has a lot of technology in it, and it is performs really well at keeping it at the temperature, humidity, and the general climate that we require. So therefore, it is superior, much superior to growing outdoor. If I had the same plants just outside my greenhouse, they're not going to do near as well as they do inside. However, if you don't have a greenhouse that has the controls to be able to do that, to be able to control the climate where you need it and want it, then you are probably going to create problems. And this would be the number one factor. I mean, if I had to name one, is ventilation. Running, if you can't extract the air out of that greenhouse fast enough, as fast as it's basically dumping, literally, the plants are literally uh, ex- transpiring moisture into the air. um, you create vapor pressure differential issues, and I think everybody's probably heard of this. It's the VPD. It's related to, but not really the same thing as relative humidity, and it's very hard to control in greenhouses. Whereas in outdoor climates, the vapor pressure differential is essentially neutral, is controlled by nature. So the short answer is, if you have the proper greenhouse facility, it is superior. If you don't, then oftentimes outdoor growing can be better. But this is also can go into different climates, in that if you have a lot of rain, certainly covered is going to do better, but maybe you don't want walls on your greenhouse. So maybe you just want to have a nice open greenhouse with just a clear covering to keep the rain from actually beating down on your plants. So I think, in the end, of course, the answer is going to vary based on where you're at. But hopefully that answered the question for Rick. And of course, we could certainly go into a whole episode on greenhouses, as that is one of my expertises. And there's lots of cool pictures of our facility on Instagram, and probably some on a little bit on our website. And I'm always happy to answer questions for people. We just built a new greenhouse that's Agritech by Agritech out of the Bay Area in California, and it's been fabulous for us. So I'd love to hear more questions on this, though. So we'll move on.
I think there's also really good examples of our hair of the dog grown by Jamaica Ganja Tours in a greenhouse with no walls, similar to what you're talking about down in Jamaica. So I think that helps them out with the rain. So that's a perfect example of what you're talking about if you
Yeah.
guys want to check them out on Instagram.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I know that I saw the picture that you shared, and it's actually been a method I've touted for years to people, but it's not something you see very often. But basically, yeah, the greenhouse without walls, because you really want the outdoor climate itself, and the airflow is preferred as to just trapping it all in. So cool. That's good. Thanks.
Right on. So let's keep going. We have a question from Nate. Are mineral-based fertilizers better and cheaper for indoor cultivation than growing organically?
good good one, Nate. So yeah, though, no, that's a great question. So the the answer can be complicated. For the most part, it depends on what you're using. So I certainly don't mean to ruffle any feathers here. I'm not a huge fan of most liquid mineral based fertilizers. The absolute fact is that when you buy a jug of liquid fertilizer, you're buying 99% water, and with some powder sprinkled in it, and some food coloring, and a really fancy label, and some really expensive advertisements in magazines, and you're getting sold. Certainly, I'm sure people. I know people that do really good with some of these liquids, and I'm certainly not at all telling anyone that they don't work. But you are paying a lot of money for water, and for shipping that water, and for the containers. So we do use mineral-based fertilizers in some of our breeding. It sometimes just works a little better for us than organic. But we use powders. We use the powder-based fertilizers. You get a lot more bang for your buck with them, and on a commercial scale, it really just doesn't pay for itself to use liquid fertilizers. However, for small home grows and stuff, and you have the budget for it, I mean, it's certainly, if it works. Again, I always go back to this: if you found something that works, don't try and reinvent the wheel. If you're doing really good with it, just stick with it. So overall, between the price difference between organic and mineral, I mean, if you use powder based commercial mineral fertilizers, they're pretty cheap to run. I mean, it's organic. Now, if you buy bagged soil that's hot, that I say hot as in loaded with fertilizer already, and you use bottled microbes, or you make your own teas, both great methods. You can basically make the soil last at least a full harvest without really adding any fertilizer, or if you do, just a little top dress. So the answer can be a little confusing on which one costs more or less. So I think Once again, great subject to hopefully this spawns some questions and enough questions in the future for us to actually just pull an episode on organic growing, and then we can also do an episode on mineral fertilizer growing, or a method on both. But I think to end it, I'm going to say that for years and years, I was always a really big fan of just inert soil mediums and mineral fertilizers, because I felt like I had all the control under my fingertips. And actually, just in the last few years, I've embraced organic growing much more. And in our flower cultivation facility, for the state of California, for the recreational market, we actually grow organically, and we have great success with that. So I guess I bat for both teams on that one as well. So hopefully that answers Nate's question, and let's spawn some more questions to hope bring it on, guys. I'd love to talk more about this.
Right on. So I think we have time for a couple more questions. Let's see. We have a good one here from Travis. I'm a beginner grower and am looking for some insight into the different methods of growing for a small tent. I'm trying to decide between hydroponics, conventional soil, or going strictly organic. Adam, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so yeah, we kind of touched base on that one, but I'm going to go through this one real quick. So, if you're first time grower, small tent, I think hydroponics is kind of overkill for the beginning. I mean, soil, I'm just a big fan of soil growing. I've grown lots of hydroponics over the years, and I've certainly done good with it. And I'm not an anti-hydroponic guy, but for beginners, I mean, it doesn't get much more hands-on and simple than just using a conventional soil, or an organic pre-amended soil that you just add some microbes to. And if I had anything to say, it's less is more, and don't overwater. That's probably what most beginners do, is they're too many cooks in the kitchen, or too many spices in the soup or whatever, and they're in there too much, and they feel like they have to do something every day. But pick up those pots and feel the weight of them, and feel them when they're nice, and when they're wet, and kind of get that feel for them. After you get good at it, you can tell usually by just looking at the top of the soil if it needs to be watered or not. So I know we're running low, so let's move on. Let's move on here. I'm running out of time.
Right on. So let's see. I think this is a great follow-up question for the previous. I just started growing a year ago. This is Rory. I just started growing a year ago, and I find myself struggling in a lot of different areas. Consistency has been a problem for me. If you could offer some basic principles and general advice to new growers, what would it be? I know you just touched on that, but can you expand a little bit?
Yeah, I did touch on that, and I will expand on it. So probably the number one advice I could give is less is more. As I said, if you find something that works, don't keep trying to nitpick it. Perfection will never, ever, ever be obtained in growing and cultivating anything. And I don't care if no one's ever going to prove that wrong to me. Prove me wrong on that. It's always a moving target, and nobody in the world has it perfected. So accept your mistakes and learn from them, and don't oversteer. Don't auto correct yourself and oversteer the ship, because oh, I put too much fertilizer in, now I'm going to try to dump tons of water on it to get the fertilizer out, and that's oversteering, because then you're overwatering your plants. And then don't jump on all the hype. A lot of times these additives and stuff are basically snake oil. I mean, you don't need most of that. I've proven it time and time again. I have friends that have these super complicated fertilizer regimes with insane amounts of additives, and an insane amount of money they spend on all this stuff. And it's like, oh, but wait, what was your yield? And your flower doesn't even look that good. So why are you trying to push your method to me? When I see people with just super simple, pre-amended organic soil and just killing it. And so having a green thumb is a real thing. I mean, and I think a lot of times people with green thumbs follow and fit that, is that they're not people trying to dump money into their grow or into their, jumping on every hype they see or every advertisement they read, or going into the hydro store and relying on the guy that works there to tell them to give them all the advice. So use your gut feeling. Don't oversteer, and less is more.
Right on. So I think that covers the growing questions. There's a subject I want to touch upon because we keep getting questions for it or about this subject. And we have uh, an article that you wrote on this subject. It's available at 2020mendocino.com/blog. But Adam, can you touch on how 2020 navigates the controversial subject of naming strains?
Oh boy, yeah, let's talk about ruffling feathers on this one. So this has been a contentious issue for any breeder, and everyone that's breeding understands that there's this kind of, you're always walking a tightrope, or you're always on thin ice with the strain naming thing. And I finally kind of at one point put my foot down on all this, and I'm like, you know what, this shit is ridiculous. Like, I'm not going to keep like dealing with these kind of like self-policing and these people that are, if essentially, there's the strain name police out there, and they're just watching, they're constantly patrolling everybody and trying to essentially, say, oh, somebody so and so, some breeder here or there already has that strain name or whatever. So when I started looking into this subject, and I wrote a really good blog article about it, as you mentioned, so this I can essentially just kind of regurgitate what I wrote. But when I looked into this subject, I decided, like, let's look at this from the point of view of like a legal standpoint, and how would the copyright or the trademark office look at this subject. Well, it was really quite obvious how they will look at it once it's legal. Right now, they won't look at the subject at all because you can't copyright or trademark anything that you specifically for cannabis. However, what I looked at was the music industry, and in the music industry, this subject came up back in the 1930s over song titles. Basically, two musicians had the same song title, and one tried to sue the other, and the courts finally said, enough is enough. Like, song titles can't just inherently be copyrighted, and they basically used a term, and that was that song title needed sufficient originality. Now, in order to have sufficient originality, it basically suggested that the courts suggested that the song name can't essentially be an English phrase. So it can't just be two English words straight out of the English dictionary, and therefore now I'm staking claim to that song title. A good example, there's this, if you type in look up the name Sunday Morning, I believe there's 17 or more songs named Sunday Morning. And what differentiates those songs is the song itself and the author or the musician, the artist. So, I mean, just thinking offhand, a good example of the song Aerosmith, "Crazy." The song's called "Crazy." So, I mean, they can't copyright that name, and therefore, but the song is "Crazy" by Aerosmith, and so that's the approach we're taking to this. Now, we certainly, when we come up with a strain name, we don't just say, yeah, fuck everybody, we're going to name it what we want, because of this new philosophy that Adams decided that he's going to use. But we definitely aren't going to fall to the winds of the crazy strain naming police that are out there trying to, cross-reference every single name. So, our standard strategy is we type in the name on Google. We essentially do a Google search, and if it looks like it's a pretty prevalent name from another breeder and it's really kind of made its mark, then we're gonna veer away from it because we don't want to purposely ruffle feathers. However, I also kind of look at it like the music industry, and that that this is a strain that we've kind of coined. It's the 2020 version of this, whatever it may be, and we're the artist, and this is our song. And so I hope that other people can embrace this. And I've been kind of beating this drum for a little while on a few different podcasts I've done, and I mean, I seem to get a lot of good reception from it because I feel like a lot of people are feeling chained down by this. But come on, guys, let's just open up. Let who cares? Let someone use your title of your strain name. You have the right to use two English words that are straight out of the English dictionary, and
Uh,
if they're not sufficiently original, then or if they don't have sufficient originality, as it's quoted in the courts, then you shouldn't be able to stake claim to that name. And I hope everyone agrees with me on that, and I hope people can preach this and really get this out there for the breeding community and the cannabis community as a whole.
right on. I know that last question and subject kind of veered away from the overall theme of the show today, but I think it needed to be said. So I think we're just at about our 20 minutes, if not a little over. I think we never get that exactly right, but then again, this isn't an exact science, right? So um,
That's right.
please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you'd like to submit a question, please visit 2020mendocino.com/podcast. My name is Carlos. Adam, do you have any parting words?
Thanks for joining, and come on, keep bringing these questions on. So we'll keep this thing going as long as there's a stack of questions for us every week. Thanks for everyone.